Now let's look at monopoly. So monopoly, for its name, mono, it means only one. It is to talk about the case where the market is, the supply side of the market is dominated by only one seller. Only has one seller, merely. And the ability of a seller or buyer to affect the price of a good is defined as market power, and in this case, monopoly power. In this section, we're going to answer questions like, why do we care about monopoly? What is the effect of monopoly power? And why do we, in our real world, is actually banning monopoly? Okay. So here, I demonstrated some mathematical derivation to show why marginal revenue is lower than price, which is demand. Okay. But the key thing for you to master is the intuition. Okay. Why marginal revenue, which is the revenue that you get as a seller from selling each additional unit of product, why is that lower than the price of the product at the moment? So with additional product sold, we will gain more income or revenue per the current price of the product. But also more product will cause the price to reduce as well. Why is that? Because you're facing a demand, right? As you're producing one additional unit of product, there is less scarcity that the consumers are facing. Because a lot of demand, the quantity demanded is actually has an inverse relationship with the price, right? And here, with more availability of the product, the price would decrease. Okay, so this is the intuition, and the key is because monopoly faces a downward sloping demand. Why is that? Why is the demand downward sloping here compared to the perfectly competitive case where we consider the individual firms as facing a horizontal demand? Well, because consumers are inelastic to the monopoly's products, and also because monopoly here, because there is only one firm producing the product, right? So the monopoly here is a price setter, meaning their quantity supplied will affect the price. That's why we have the second one. That's why, as one more additional unit of product is released to the market by the producer, the price is tend to decrease. Okay. So that is why for monopoly, marginal revenue is lower than demand. And here we have a numeric example. Marginal revenue is derivative. Every time as we talk about marginal, that's derivative. Intuitive meaning change in revenue resulting from a 1 unit increase, additional unit of increase in output. And average revenue is just the revenue per unit of output. Okay. So here, if we were to consider a firm that is facing the following demand, which is P equals to 6 minus Q, and we can put up this table. Okay. And here we can calculate the marginal revenue. And here we have the market price. So when Q equals to 1, marginal revenue is 5, price is 5. And starting from there, as you can see, price is 4 for Q equal to 2, marginal revenue is 3, lower than price. Price is, quantity is 3, price is 3, but marginal revenue is 1, lower than 3, right? Minus 1, lower than 2, minus 3, lower than 1. The conclusion is marginal revenue is lower than the demand. So here, let's look at demand, which is 6 minus Q. And we can actually derive the marginal revenue, which is the derivative of total revenue with respect to Q. And here the result is 6 minus 2Q, that is smaller than 6 minus Q. So marginal revenue is lower than demand. Okay, so that's the first thing. First key point for the monopoly, or for any firm that has monopoly power, not necessarily monopoly, for oligopoly, for monopoly competition, it also holds for any firm that has a monopoly power, for any firm whose quantity supplied can affect the price, not as passively a price taker as an individual firm in a perfect competitive market. Then in that case, you're going to face a downward sloping demand, and correspondingly, the marginal revenue should be lower than this downward sloping demand. Okay, and the downward sloping demand is because you have inelastic consumers to your product. That's possibly because you're the only one in the market, or possibly because you have a certain fan loyalty in your consumers. Okay, so that's the first thing. And here we have the second thing, which is monopolist's output decision. And here, let me repeat this golden rule, which is marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. So this graph seems complicated, but here it starts with demand and marginal revenue lower than demand. And as you can see, marginal revenue intersects with marginal cost. And here we have the quantity, the optimal quantity, namely profit maximizing quantity. Okay, so now let's look at deviation from that. If you are producing up to Q2, right? If you're doubting on Q star being the optimal profit maximizing quantity, but from here, let's look at Q2, in which you produce more than Q star. In that case, from Q star to Q2, each additional unit that you produce, you're facing a loss. Marginal cost exceeds marginal revenue. Yet for each additional unit that you produce, the cost for that additional unit exceeds the revenue that you can collect by selling this additional unit. What's the conclusion? It's not worth doing, right? So don't overproduce. Produce less. Well, here at this point, marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. By producing Q1, this very unit, you are making a positive gain. But have you left any money on the table? The answer is yes. Why is that? From Q1 to Q star, for each additional unit that you produce, you will gather more income than the cost. Then the question, if you only produce at Q1, you will be questioned, why leave money on the table by doing too less of work? Okay. And here I'm referring back to the first video, in which I give you a step-by-step rundown of this four-step method, okay, to figure out, to find the area in the graph that represents the profit. So marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, that tells you what you should do as a monopoly. That's marginal revenue equals to marginal cost. That's here. Okay, so this is what you're going to produce. And then let's look at the two sides, two aspects of the consequence of your plan, of your decision. Okay, so total cost. How do you find total cost? We are looking at the corresponding average total cost of when you're producing at Q star. That is ATC of Q star here. And the lower rectangle, whose area is average total cost, multiplied by Q star, that's your total cost when you're producing at Q star. Okay, we find the total cost, and total revenue is you're selling this Q star to the market, And for each unit that you sell, for each gallon that you pump, right, it's a uniform price. So it's P of Q star, what the market will respond, right, at this availability of products that you release, that's the seller release to the market. And that's the price by quantity, P by Q star. So the long triangle, the long rectangle is the total revenue. And the difference between total revenue and total cost, so that is the shaded rectangle here, that is your profit. So you see, with the monopoly power, we do have a positive profit. So now let us just quickly touch on why do we have to ban monopoly? Okay, the answer is here. Let's look at competitive market. Why do we consider competitive market to be the best, to be the most efficient? So marginal cost is also supply. And if we are looking into the industry, right? So here, even though the monopoly is individual firm, it's also the industry, all the seller side, right? So let's look at industry. If you have industry where marginal cost is the supply and supply intersects with demand, we have this competitive equilibrium or market equilibrium. And PC, that is the competitive price, and QC, that's the competitive quantity. Those are the equilibrium price and quantity for competitive equilibrium. So let's look at this. The price of Q star, which is monopoly price, is higher than the price, competitive price. Quantity, Q star monopoly quantity is lower than competitive quantity. So what does that mean? That means the monopoly is taking advantage of its power by supplying less than what would be the supply for a competitive market, right? So as to push the price higher. The monopoly pricing is higher than the competitive price, so that the monopoly can be there, sitting in there, deriving an excessive profit, which potentially harms the consumer side. Okay. So here, realizing that under providing their products can cause the market price to increase so as to maintain a high profit level, the monopolist is willing to under provide, which is to say to produce less than competitive market. And that's why the society is to implement antitrust laws. And that's why in chapter 7, we studied the concentration of the industry. And if the industry is over concentrated, possibly we're going to force them to collapse. We're going to stipulate, the court is going to stipulate a split. Okay, so let's get to the social cost of monopoly power. Okay, so here marginal cost intersects with demand. That is what the competitive equilibrium is supposed to be. And here marginal cost intersects with marginal revenue. That is what a monopoly is going to decide. And here you see there is a deviation, and we say deviation from competitive equilibrium, it will result into a loss in social welfare, which we call deadweight loss. Okay, so here we do have a deadweight loss. That is this bigger triangle, and this triangle is what could have been obtained if this market is competitive, but here, because of certain reason, this market now is monopoly, then we are losing, the society is losing this much. Okay, I don't require you to dive into too much details, but understanding why this triangle is Darwin loss, that's what I expect you to be able to master. Okay, and now let's go to one question. So here, this is a number question. Okay, knowing that the cost is this much and demand is this much, and then if I were to ask you to work out the profit maximizing output, how should you do that? For cost, you can derive the marginal cost, which is a derivative of this. 50 is a constant, the derivative of this is 0. Q squared is a square term, the derivative of that is 2Q. So marginal cost is 2Q. And marginal revenue comes from the derivative of revenue with respect to Q. And what is total revenue? That is P by Q. P is 40 minus Q multiplied by Q. That is this. Or it's 40Q minus Q squared. And it's marginal revenue, which is the derivative of this, of the total revenue with respect to Q. That is 40 minus 2 times Q. And when marginal revenue equals to marginal cost, we can solve the optimal, namely profit maximizing quantity. That is 40 minus 2Q equals to 2Q. So it's 40 equals to 4 times of Q. So Q should be 10. That's the monopolistic decision on the production. Then what is the total profit? You just plug this Q equals to 10 into total cost function. You can work out the total cost and plug that Q equals to 10 into total revenue. You work out the revenue, and the total revenue minus total cost, that is your profit. Okay, so now let's do a quick flashback on chapter 7, which was what we actually have done in last week. When you are doing this, say, learner index, okay, possibly you were questioning why are we doing this? Well, we are trying to measure the monopoly power, and monopoly power was, just to remind you, monopoly power is defined as how the monopoly can influence the price, right? In the previous case, as we found, that's basically how the monopoly can mark up their price higher than the market price and than the competitive price, right? Okay. How is that? How does that happen? Just to remind, for competitive firm, price equals to marginal cost in the long run. But for firm with monopoly power, price exceeds marginal cost. That is what we call as a markup by monopoly power. Okay, why does that happen? Let's look at this following two graphs. The one on the left, okay, is the case where the demand is pretty flat, close to horizontal. And just to recall, the extreme case is the demand is totally flat. In that case, that is a perfect competitive case, right? But this case, the demand, there is still some steepness, but it's pretty flat. That means the consumers that you're facing, even though you're a monopoly, the consumers that you're facing is pretty elastic. Means possibly they don't care about your product. I just give you one example. Say candles. Say even though you are the only producer in this world of candle, but possibly people don't care because there are still so many alternatives. In terms of lighting, we have lamps, we have a lot of things. In terms of romance, we have a lot of flowers, right? So even though you are the only one who produces candle, possibly this is what the demand you're gonna face. Then are you able to price much higher than the competitive price? First, what is competitive price? That is supply, which is marginal cost, equals to demand, which is this point. Marginal cost intersects with demand, which is average revenue. Okay, so here, let's just draw it up. Your monopolistic pricing is marginal cost equals to marginal revenue. And here you have this price. And you see this monopoly pricing is no much higher than the intersection point, than the price of the intersection competitive equilibrium. No. Okay, so here the conclusion is, if you're facing a pretty elastic consumers, even though you're a monopoly, you don't have a lot of power to overprice, to mark up your price, right? And here you can see the key thing is what is the taste of your consumers? What is the consumer that you're facing, right? On the other hand, look at this graph. If the consumers that you're facing are very inelastic, meaning they have a strong loyalty to your product, say SUU, it is a brand, it is unique for the school, right? Possibly several years after you graduate, you're going to go back and buy some alumni products labeled with SUU. And supposedly you should not be able to get from anywhere else in the world, right? Say, if that means a lot to you, your identity, SUU identity, it means a lot to you, and then it means that you have a fan loyalty or brand loyalty to SUU branded products. You're inelastic. To you, it's SUU only, right? There possibly are a lot of other hats, other shirts, but you only care those. You have special attachment to those who are labeled with SUU marks. In that case, as a SUU product consumers, right, you are very inelastic. And here, let's look at what's the consequence. Well, SUU being a monopolistic supplier of those products, right? What should they do as the monopoly? Well, that's marginal cost equals to marginal revenue. So we have the monopolistic pricing, which is P star. But if it is a competitive, if say SUU only produces generic products without SUU label on it, then the equilibrium should be marginal cost, which is supply, intersects with average revenue, which is demand. That's here. And here you can see price exceeds the marginal, the competitive equilibrium in a much greater extent to the graph on the left. Okay, so here another conclusion: if consumers are more inelastic, meaning they are more loyal to your products, then this monopolist supplier, they can take a better advantage of the unique position that they have in the market to make more profit, to mark up their price higher, because they know even if I mark up my price higher, as the consumer, you're loyal to my products, you're not going to cut short your consumption by too much. Okay, so to make this more managerial, this actually explains to you why on the first hand, this is more of a disputable topic these days. With big data, we're trying to analyze consumers' behavior, right? So possibly if you happen to have kids, if you have bought, say, some diapers, then possibly you're gonna see more promotion of, say, pacifiers, because possibly those producer of pacifier, they know possibly you at this moment you're pretty inelastic, you're in a strong need, inevitable need of pacifier, right? Then they're trying to track your habits, track your taste to find on which products you're inelastic, and then possibly they can mark up higher the price and make more money out of it. That's one thing. The second thing is, why do we spend so much money on sales, on promotion, advertisement? And why do we care about, say, the reputation of the firm? Because you want your firm to be unique, to be insubstitutable by your competitors. In that case, your firm will stand out even though there could be a lot of producers, other producers, say of computers, say if you are only loyal to Apple products, then Apple itself can stand out alone as a monopoly of Apple brand, right? And then if it creates enough brand loyalty, that means if this monopoly makes their consumer to be inelastic, namely loyal enough to their products, then it gives the monopoly a lot of power to price high. And what you learned previously, -1/ED, elasticity of demand, that is basically to measure how strong the monopoly power is, how capable the monopoly can mark up their price over the competitive price, which is marginal cost. And here is everything that you need to master for monopoly.